স্বাগত সকলকে গল্পকথার শ্রুতিপাঠ্যে। শ্রোতা বন্ধুগণ, আপনারা ইতিমধ্যে অবগত হয়েছেন আমাদের কয়েকটি পর্ব চলছে রবীন্দ্রনাথ ঠাকুরের রচিত ভ্রমণ সাহিত্য জাপান যাত্রী নিয়ে। এই জাপান যাত্রী রচিত হয়েছে 15টি চিঠি নিয়ে। এই 15টি চিঠি ছাড়াও জাপান যাত্রীতে সংযোজন অধ্যায়ে 3টি চিঠি রয়েছে। এই সংযোজন অধ্যায়ের 3টি চিঠি আজকের পর্বে আপনাদেরকে পাঠ করে শোনাবো। আসুন তবে আজকের পাঠ শুরু করা যাক। সংযোজন অধ্যায়ের প্রথম চিঠি, ধ্যানী জাপান। কোরিয়ায় আমার নিমন্ত্রণ ছিল, যাবার জন্য প্রস্তুত হয়েছিলাম। কথা ছিল সেখান থেকে রেলপথে রাশিয়ায় যাব। সেখানে জনসাধারণকে কিভাবে ও কি পরিমাণে অশিক্ষা থেকে উদ্ধার করার ব্যবস্থা হয়েছে সেইটি জানবার জন্যে আমার বিশেষ আগ্রহ ছিল। কিন্তু আমার আয়ু 4-20 বছরের মধ্যঘাটে এসে পৌঁছেছে। এ কথাটা যদিও আমি প্রায় ভুলি এবং অন্য যাদের গরজ তারাও মনে রাখতে চায় না, তবু মহাকালের হিসাব রক্ষক সতর্ক আছেন। তাই বয়সের বোঝার উপর কর্মের বোঝা বেড়ে ওঠে ক্লান্তিতে আমাকে অভিভূত করে দিলে। জাপানের একজন বড় ডাক্তার এসে আমার দেহটাকে উল্টিয়ে পাল্টিয়ে বাজিয়ে নিয়ে অন্তত 10 দিনের জন্যে শয়নকক্ষে আমাকে অশ্রম কারাবাসের আদেশ করে দিলেন। সেই সঙ্গে আমার সমস্ত কর্তব্যের নিমন্ত্রণ বাজেয়াপ্ত হলো। আগামী শরৎকাল পর্যন্ত জাপানে আমার আতিথ্যের প্রস্তাব ও আয়োজন ছিল। প্রতিকূল স্বাস্থ্য বাধা দেওয়াতে দেশে ফেরবার পথে যাত্রার উদ্যোগ করলেম। তখন আমি টোকিয়াতে একটি জাপানি সুরিদের বাড়িতে আশ্রয় নিয়েছিলাম। তার কাগজের কারবার, তিনি ধনী। হারাসানের পল্লী আবাস হাকানে ছিলেন। জাপানের সঙ্গে সর্বদেশের হৃদ্যতার সম্বন্ধ ঘটে, এই তার ইচ্ছা। এই জন্যে তিনি বিস্তর অর্থ ব্যয় করতে কুণ্ঠিত নন। এছাড়া জনসাধারণকে ধর্ম, কর্ম ও জ্ঞান শিক্ষা দেবার জন্যে তিনি বাড়ির কাছে বিদ্যালয় স্থাপন করেছেন। এ কথা শুনে অনেকে বিস্মিত হবেন যে ধ্যান চর্চাও তাঁর শিক্ষা ব্যাপারের একটি অঙ্গ। ধ্যান অভ্যাসের জন্যে মস্ত একটি নিভৃত ঘর তিনি তৈরি করে রেখেছেন। একদা বৌদ্ধ ধর্মের সঙ্গে সঙ্গে জাপানি ধ্যানের প্রচার হয়েছিল। দেব পূজার সঙ্গে এই ধ্যানের যোগ নেই। মনকে স্তব্ধ করা, অবহিত করা, ধৈর্য বুদ্ধিশক্তিকে দৃঢ় করার পক্ষে ধ্যানের উপযোগিতা সেখানেই সকলে স্বীকার করে সাধারণত জীবনযাত্রায় ও নৈপুণ্য ও সৌষ্ঠব সাধনের জন্যে ধ্যান একটা প্রধান উপায়, এ কথা জাপানের সাধারণ লোকেও বোঝে। সেখানে জাপানের একটি অনুষ্ঠান প্রচলিত আছে, তাকে ধর্মানুষ্ঠান বলা যায় না, অথচ তার ক্রিয়া পদ্ধতি ধর্মানুষ্ঠানের মতোই একটি শ্রদ্ধাপূর্ণ গাম্ভীর্য দ্বারা পরিবৃত। চা প্রস্তুত ও চা পানের সমস্ত প্রণালীর ভেতর দিয়ে দেহমনের ধ্যান সিদ্ধ সংযমকে অস্খলিতভাবে প্রকাশ করাই এর উদ্দেশ্য বলে আমার মনে হয়েছিল। গতবারে জাপানে থাকতে এক জায়গায় স্বরপ্রয়োগ অনুশীলনের সুযোগ দেখেছিলাম। ব্যাপারটা কেবলমাত্র হাতের কৌশল বা দৈহিক ব্যায়াম নয়, এটাকে তারা আধ্যাত্মিক সাধনা বলেই জানে। এটা স্বর চালনার যোগে ধ্যানেরই অভ্যাস। মনকে একাগ্র করবার চর্চাই এর মূলে। কেবল দৃষ্টিশক্তি নয়, ধ্যান শক্তিতেই আন্তরিক বাহ্যিক সকল প্রকার লক্ষ্য সিদ্ধি হয়। ধনুর্বিদ্যা চর্চায় এই তত্ত্বকেই তারা স্বীকার করে। দ্বিতীয়বারে যখন জাপানে যাই, আমার সঙ্গে পিয়ারসন ছিলেন। জাপানের একজন ডাক্তার তাকে তার আশ্রমে নিয়ে যান। আরোগ্য লাভের পক্ষে ধ্যানের শক্তি যে একটি প্রধান উপায়, এই তার মত। পিয়ারসনকে তিনি তার নিভৃত আশ্রমে ধ্যানের দীক্ষা দিয়েছিলেন। এ কথা সকলেই জানেন জাপানে একটি বৌদ্ধ সম্প্রদায় আছে, যে সম্প্রদায়ের লোক মুক্তি সাধনার জন্যে ধ্যানের প্রতি বিশেষ আস্থা রাখেন। আমি গতবারে সেই জেন অর্থাৎ ধ্যান সম্প্রদায়ের এক মঠে গিয়ে সেখানকার প্রধান সন্ন্যাসীর সঙ্গে আলাপ করেছিলাম। ধ্যানের দ্বারা আত্মশক্তি লাভ ও আত্মশক্তির দ্বারা মুক্তির বাধা দূর করা সম্বন্ধে তিনি যা বলেছিলেন তার মধ্যে আমাদের ভারতীয় সাধনারই একটি বিশেষ তত্ত্ব অনুভব করলুম। সেবারে টোকিও নারী বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের ছাত্রীরা আমাকে কারাই যাওয়া পাহাড়ের উপর নিমন্ত্রণ করে নিয়ে গিয়েছিলেন। সেখানে গ্রীষ্মাবকাশের সময় একদল ছাত্রী প্রতি বৎসর কোনো একজন উপদেষ্টার কাছে কোনো একটি বিশেষ বিষয়ে উপদেশ গ্রহণ করে থাকেন। আমার কাছে শুনতে চাইলেন ধ্যান তত্ত্ব সম্বন্ধে। আমি তাঁদের অনুরোধ শুনে বিস্মিত হয়েছিলাম। তখনও আমি জানতাম না যে ধ্যানের সাধনা সেখানে সকলেরই জানা। বস্তুত ক্রমশই বুঝতে পারলাম জাপানের সমস্ত লোকের মধ্যেই গোচরে ও অগোচরে ধ্যানের প্রভাব কাজ করছে। এই জাতের সর্বপ্রধান শক্তি যেটা দেখতে পেয়েছি সেটা হচ্ছে সংযম। তাদের দেহচালনার মধ্যে আশ্চর্য একটি ধৈর্য আছে, মনের মধ্যেও তাই। বহু শতাব্দীর অভ্যাসক্রমে এরা কোনো কাজই যেমন তেমন করে করে না, একান্ত নিবিষ্ট হয়ে ও শোভনভাবে করে। দেখে কেবলই মনে হয় কাজের সমস্ত প্রণালীর মধ্যে আগাগোড়া এরা সমস্ত মনকে স্থাপিত করতে শিখেছে। এটাই হচ্ছে কর্মের মধ্যে ধ্যান। একটি সাধারণ মেয়েকে খাওয়ার সময় লক্ষ্য করে দেখেছি পাত্র হাতে তুলে ধরা, গ্রাস মুখে তুলে নেওয়া সমস্তই সুবিহিত যত্নে ও সংযতভাবে করে। আমাদের দেশে সাধারণের মধ্যে আহার ব্যাপারে যে অসংযম ও অশোভনতা আছে এ তার একেবারেই বিপরীত। এই মেয়েটিকেই পুষ্পরাত্রে ফুল সাজাতে দেখলুম। সে যেন কার আরাধনা, তাতে কত নৈপুণ্য, কত নিষ্ঠা। যথারীতি ফুল সাজাবার বিদ্যা শিখতে এদের 2-3 বৎসর লাগে। কবেতে একজন শিক্ষয়িত্রীকে জিজ্ঞাসা করেছিলেন, এতে অভিনিবেশের সঙ্গে এই যে ফুল সাজানোর তোমরা সম্পন্ন করো, এর সম্বন্ধে তোমাদের এত যে বেশি সতর্কতা, এর অর্থটা কি? তিনি আমাকে বললেন, ইতিহাস বিখ্যাত তাদের একজন যোদ্ধা একদা বলেছিলেন যে এই ফুল সাজানোর অনুষ্ঠানে তাকে তার যুদ্ধ ব্যাপারে শিক্ষা উৎসাহ দেয়। আমি বুঝলুম এই যে অবিচলিত মনের ধ্যানের দ্বারা পুষ্পপাত্রে ফুলের প্রসাধন সুসম্পূর্ণ হয়ে ওঠে, সেই ধ্যানের একাগ্রতাই যুদ্ধ জয়ের প্রধান শক্তি। একদিন ইয়োকাহামায় একজন সুবিখ্যাত আধুনিক চিত্রকরের বাড়িতে গিয়ে দেখি তার একটি ঘরের পাশে বেদিতে বুদ্ধদেবের মূর্তি। শোনা গেল সেই বুদ্ধের সামনে বসে ধ্যান করে তবে ছবি আঁকেন। এমন নয় যে বুদ্ধেরই ছবি, কিন্তু ধ্যানের দ্বারা চিত্রকরের রচনা শক্তির জড়তা ঘোচে, চিত্তের উদ্যম সম্পূর্ণ জাগ্রত হয়ে ওঠে। বৌদ্ধ ধর্মের সঙ্গে সঙ্গে যে ধ্যানের সাধনা ও চীন থেকে জাপানে প্রবর্তিত হয়েছিল, চীনের চিত্রকলায় তারই প্রভাব যে কত প্রবল সে সম্বন্ধে পিলগ্রিমেজ অফ বুদ্ধিজম নামক গ্রন্থে যে আলোচনা হয়েছে তার থেকে একটা অংশ আমি অনুবাদ করে দিই। চান বৌদ্ধ সম্প্রদায়ের প্রভাব চৈন চিত্রকরদের মনকে যখন অধিকার করলে তখন তারা ফটোগ্রাফারের মতো নকল করার দিকে গেলেন না। যে কোনো ভূদৃশ্য বা মানুষ বা জন্তুর রূপ তাঁরা প্রকাশ করতে চেয়েছেন। প্রথমে তার মর্মটুকু অন্তরের মধ্যে শোষণ করে নিয়ে তারপরে ভেতরের দিক থেকে বাইরে সেটাকে প্রকাশ করতেন। যদি একটা ঝর্ণা আঁকবার ইচ্ছা করতেন তাহলে প্রহরের পর প্রহর তার সামনে ধ্যানমগ্ন হয়ে বসে থাকতেন। হয়তো একটি নকশা মাত্র করতেন না, তারপরে সেই দৃশ্যটির উপলব্ধি হৃদয়ের মধ্যে নিয়ে ঘরে ফিরতেন। অবশেষে সেই উপলব্ধিটিকে তুলি দিয়ে প্রকাশ করতেন। প্রাচীন জৈন চিত্রকলা সর্বপ্রথমে সকলের চেয়ে বড় প্রেরণা পেয়েছে বৌদ্ধ ধর্মের কাছ থেকে। ফেনেলোসা বলেন, বিশেষ শাস্ত্রের এবং বিশেষ অনুশাসনের বন্ধন থেকে চান বৌদ্ধ সম্প্রদায় মুক্তি ঘোষণা করলেন। তারা দৃঢ় বিশ্বাসের সঙ্গে বললেন যে বুদ্ধের প্রকৃতির দ্বারা বিশ্বের সমস্তই ওতপ্রোত। It was these suggestions that led the greatest painters of the tongue and sung into those mystical and masterly interpretations of life and landscape that mark the aim of Chinese and have given to Chinese and Japanese painting that peculiar inwardness which marks it off from all the art of the West. বিশ্বব্যাপী বুদ্ধের প্রকৃতিকে ধ্যানের দ্বারা অন্তরে আকর্ষণ করে নিয়ে চিত্রকর তবেই তার চিত্রকে মহত্ব দিয়েছেন। বিশ্বের অন্তর্গত সেই সত্যের সঙ্গে গভীরভাবে যুক্ত হতে পারলে শুধু ছবি আঁকা কেন, জীবনের সকল কার্যই বিশুদ্ধ ও সুসম্পূর্ণ হতে পারে। এই বিশ্বাসটি একদা চীনে জাপানি কাজ করেছে এবং স্পষ্ট দেখতে পাই জাপানি আজও তার প্রভাব জ্ঞাত বা অজ্ঞাতসারে প্রচলিত আছে। আমাকে কৃষি অনুরাগী একজন জাপানি ভদ্রলোক বলেছিলেন যে মৈত্রী পদার্থটি বিশ্বের মূলগত সত্য। তাই তিনি বিশ্বাস করেন যে মাটিকে ভালোবাসার সঙ্গে চাষ করলে তবেই মাটির কাছ থেকে পূর্ণ প্রতিদান পাওয়া যায়। এর থেকে বোঝা যায় সত্যের সঙ্গে ধ্যানের যোগ শুধু কেবল আধ্যাত্মিক ক্ষেত্রে নয়, আধিভৌতিক সাধনাতেও তার প্রধান স্থান আছে। এই তত্ত্বটি জাপান যেন নানা আকারে গ্রহণ করেছে। আমি জাপানি বক্তৃতা সভায় ও মেয়েদের বিদ্যালয়ে অনেকবার অনেক জনতা দেখেছি। তাদের থিয়েটারে মেয়ে পুরুষ দর্শক সমাগমের মধ্যে বসেছি। তাদের ধৈর্য স্তব্ধতা দেখে বিস্ময় জন্মেছে। প্রথমবারে জাপানে যখন গিয়েছিলাম, ইয়োকাহামার একটি বাগান বাড়িতে আমার বাসা ছিল। শনি রবিবারের ছুটি উপলক্ষে সেই বাগানে বিস্তর লোক বেড়াতে আসত। আশ্চর্য সংযম। গোলমাল শুনতে পাইনি, দেখিনি যে কেউ ফুল ছিঁড়ছে বা লেশমাত্র আবর্জনায় বনপথ আকীর্ণ করছে। অচঞ্চল শান্তির সঙ্গে সকলে প্রকৃতির সৌন্দর্য ভোগে নিবিষ্ট কলহের কারণ ঘটতে অনেকবার দেখেছি, কিন্তু কলহ ঘটতে দেখিনি। চিৎকার শব্দে কর্কশ ভাষায় কেউ কাউকে গালিগালাজ করছে এ একবারও আমার চোখে পড়ল না। অথচ জাপানের এই ধৈর্য, এই শান্তি একেবারেই কাপুরুষের নয়, এ কথা বলা বাহুল্য। স্বভাবকে বশে রেখে চাঞ্চল্যকে নিরোধ করে জাপান যে শক্তির বিকার বা খর্বতা ঘটিয়েছে, এ কথা বলা চলবে না। ধ্যানের যুগ, সংযমের সাধনা সমস্ত পৃথিবী থেকেই আজ তিরস্কৃত হচ্ছে। অন্তর্গুরু শক্তি সঞ্চয়ের দ্বারা জীবনের যে পরিণতি ও কর্মের যে উৎকর্ষ ঘটে, তার উপর থেকে মানুষের বিশ্বাস পর্যন্ত চলে যাচ্ছে। উদ্দামভাবে চাঞ্চল্য প্রকাশের জয় কীর্তন জাপানকেও অধিকার ও অভিভূত করবে কি না, এ কথা আমি সেখানে অনেককে জিজ্ঞাসা করেছি। তাতে অনেকেই উত্তর দিয়েছে যে জাপানের বহুযুগ ব্যাপী চরিত্র সাধনাকে কোনো কিছুতে একেবারে পরাভূত করতে পারবে, এ কখনোই সম্ভবপর নয়। ধ্যানের শক্তি আলোচনা করবার উদ্দেশ্যে এই প্রবন্ধ লিখতে বসিনি। কোরিয়া দেশের একজন যুবকের সঙ্গে একদিন আমার কি কথা হয়েছিল সেইটি জানবার জন্যে কলম ধরেছিলুম। সে কথা পরে হবে। সংযোজন অধ্যায়ের দ্বিতীয় চিঠি টু দি ইন্ডিয়ান কমিউনিটি ইন জাপান। Though I uphold the fundamental unity of the Asiatic mind, I must confess I do not believe in any characteristic which is exclusively Oriental, bearing no intimate relation to the Western mind. All great human ideals are universal. Only in their grouping, emphasis, and expression do they differ from one another. It is therefore necessary, while developing our individual character, to come into close contact with other races which may view from their own standpoint that truth, which is also truth for us, but which has with us a spatial interpretation due to our spatial experience. It is the mission of all great countries to complete their view of truth, not by merging their characteristics in those of another people, but by revealing their own personality. There can only be a coordination of truth when the differences in the human world are cultivated and respected. It is the momentous fact that you, my countryman, for whatever purpose you may have come, have formed a community in this land. Through you, India must speak to Japan, and if possible, the fact of your coming must be a glorious fact. Therefore, you must have a bond of unity among yourselves to give you a personality through which you will be able to communicate with Japan. If that is neglected, then you may return home with a full purse, but leave a gaping emptiness behind. For myself, I have come to discover something very great in the character of Japan. I am not blind to their faults. You may remember that when I first came to this part of the world, I wrote a number of lectures upon nationalism, which I read in the United States of America. The reason why these thoughts came to me in Japan was because it was here that I first saw the nation in all its naked ugliness, whose spirit we Orientals have borrowed from the West. It came vividly before my eyes because on the one hand there were the real people of Japan producing wonderful works of art, and in the details of their life giving expression to inherited codes of social behavior and honor. The spirit of Busvido, on the other hand, in contrast to the living side of the people, was the spirit of the nation, arrogantly proud, suffering from the one obsession that it was different from all other Asiatic peoples. Japan was faced with the most difficult trial of suddenly being started into power and prosperity, and had begun to show all the teeth and claws of the nation, which have been demoralizing the civilized world, spreading far and wide and appalling amount of cruelty and deception. I could not specially blame Japan for this, but I heartily deplored the fact that she, with her code of honor, her ideal of perfection, and her belief in the need for grace in everyday life, could yet become infected with this epidemic of selfishness and with the boastfulness of egotism. I frankly confess that I was then deeply mortified, for though the people of Japan on this first occasion accepted me with the enthusiastic welcome in the beginning, yet directly they came to know the ideas that I had, they felt nervous. They thought that idealism would weaken their moral, that ideals were not for those nations who must be unscrupulously strong, that the nation must never have any feelings of disgust from the handling of diplomatic filth or of shrinking from the use of weapons of brutal power. Human victims had to be shot and the nation had to be enriched with plunder. Nevertheless, I did not blame Japan for considering me to be dangerous. Though I felt the heart of this evil, yet at the same time I knew that beneath the iron mail coat of the nation, the living spirit of the people had been working in secret. Today, I feel sure that these people have the promise of a great future, though that may not be evident in the facts of the present. Truth is often hidden behind the obstacle of facts. Let me give you an instance from history. Nobody can doubt that Europe has always had her great intellectual strength of mind. She shuns exertion and seeks accuracy in dealing with the material world. She has dominated the whole of mankind today with a marvelous vigor and clearness of thought. But you will remember a time when her people believed in witchcraft and tortured inoffensive women. They burned Giordano Bruno for his greatness of genius, made it impossible for Galileo to speak out the truths of astronomy, and caused men to suffer unspeakable bodily pain when suspected of holding opinions a little more rational than the religious creed which it was held right and proper for them to believe. If you had built your theory of the European mind upon the facts of those days, Europe would have appeared the darkest place in the world, where freedom of thought was considered dangerous and freedom of conscience imperious. Yet even through these facts, the vigorous intellect of Europe was all the time at work, silently and secretly. I warn you never to rely on facts, to beware of keeping a superstitious faith in them. The truth which works in the obscure depth of facts is not obvious. It is like the underground stream of water, the fact of whose existence is contradicted by the rude rocks on the surface. One needs a power of vision and sympathy in order to discover the truth, which is the innermost creative force of a people. I feel it strongly that we in India have many things to learn from Japan. If only we can be humble, even those things in their civilization which we cannot accept and admire, we ought to be able to understand by viewing them in their proper place and perspective, and not by fixing them against the background of our own tradition and sentiment. I deem myself fortunate in having noted this time certain characteristic truths in the Japanese race, which I believe will work through their subconscious mind and one day produce great results in a luminous relevant of their soul. Let me offer a few sketches from the notebook of my memory which may give you a picture of their spirit. 9 years ago, when I was living at Mr. Herr's house in Yokohama, it struck me every day in this beautiful garden how working men would be coming out of the factories at midday and walking for a considerable distance to sit under the shade of his pine forest, silently to watch the meeting of the great sea and the sky for some 5 minutes, as though it were food and drink to them, and then walking all the way back to their work. This is a great achievement, that the whole people of the land should come to have a hunger for the beauty that is a screen and great, that has no appeal to their sensual excitement, a beauty with which in the busiest time of the day they could step their mind and thus realize their freedom in the infinite. On every Saturday and Sunday, men, women, and children would crowd through the different alleys and avenues of pines and oaks, threading their way to some open space in the mellow light of the afternoon. There was no sign of roadism, no trampling of grass or plucking of flowers, no stirring of the forest path with the peel of bananas, skins of oranges, or torn pieces of newspaper. There was no unseemly scene, no dwelling darkness, no shrieking laughter, no menacing pugnacity. These people belonged to the working classes. In other countries, we know what is the foundation of the enjoyment of such people. What strong sensations they need. Sensation which show the insensitiveness of a mind which has to be roused by all kinds of rude jerks and shocks. But here, their holiday times seemed to me like the perfect flower to the lotus open to the pure light of the sky, to which they came like a joyous swarm of bees to sip the hidden honey in silence. This meant something great in the people, and it owned my heart. It is this profound feeling for beauty, this claim sense of perfection that is expressed in various ways in their daily conduct. The constant exercise of a patience in their daily life is the patience of a strength, which reveals in the fashioning of exquisite behavior with a self-control that is almost spiritual in its outward expression. One day, I was traveling in a motor car through the country. When we came upon a lumbering market cart which obstructed the way, what struck me especially was the patience of the motor driver. He uttered not a single rude word, but waited for a long while in perfect composure of mind and expression, until the cart could give him right of way. Each driver then saluted and we passed on. On another occasion, our motor car, by mistake of their driver, knocked against a bicycle and threw down the rider in spite of his bruises, he spoke not a word of a recrimination, nor did he even refer to our driver's mistake. He simply got up, wiped the blood from his cheek, and rode away as if nothing had happened. This little incident represented a great fact. In a variety of ways, I have seen in the conduct of the Japanese their wonderful self-control and what seems to be a sense of forgiveness, or at least of mutual understanding. In the case I have mentioned, both parties made silent allowance for each other's mistake. This is not easy. It has required strenuous discipline and centuries of civilization. I have traveled all over the world, and yet if I compare this with what prevails elsewhere or in India, I shall have to confess that the Japanese possesses a monopoly of certain elements of heroism, a heroism which is one with their artistic genius. In its essence, it has a strong energy of movement. It has that perfect proportion which comes of self-mastery. It is a creation of two opposing forces, that of expression and that of representation. I have often asked myself how these special qualities of the Japanese originated. Nature in Japan offers many contradictions in her physical aspect which balance one another. On the one hand, there is an exuberance of vegetation, but not bearing in a tropical country. This is under control. In our country, the forest has a dense undergrowth in which weeds find the same indulgence as the great fruit-bearing trees. In a tropical climate, extravagant nature finds no check in her exaggeration. In Japan, hard rocks and well-irrigated soil, the rich earth and the cold climate that does not tolerate utter intemperance of life are found together, and they keep a balance between the different impulses of nature. Improvement wealth becomes vulgar in its display of profusion only there where wealth of strength and material combines with modesty of manifestation. Does richness of truth find beautiness from? Nature in Japan has such cadence born of contradiction. Everywhere there is the contrast on the one hand of our hills, silent and motionless, and on the other of our dancing streams full of laughter. Surrounding her slim figure is the sea with its perpetual layer of adventure for man, while the rich fertility of her lowlands, drained by the rain from the sky and the river from her hillsides, has its message of the settled life of agriculture, maintained by a complex code of moral obligation, mutual understanding, and forbearance. Out of all this has been built a society contrary to the predatory civilization which for its food and materials depends upon exploitation, forcible or cunning. Her sea gives her children courage and curiosity for new experience. It has made them familiar with the mutability of life, not having the idea of stability in her earth, which has its seat upon the restless shoulders of the demon earthquake. the close neighborhood of life and death has constantly been made evident to her children. The play of sudden changes, terrible in might, against the background of a unique world of a beauty, tender and yet majestic, has made her mind easily adaptable to new ideas, all the while keeping her own personality pure and firm, imparting to new thoughts her own meaning and to new forms her own magic of beauty. There is a further contrast in the field of the mind. Buddhism is a religion which calls a meditation and introspection to self-control and self-emancipation, repression of passion and cultivation of sympathy. In opposition to this, owing to their cold climate and hilly country, to their need of intensive effort for producing the necessities of life within the narrow boundaries of their islands, a vigorous mentality has been developed in her children, and their character has been modulated into a greatness, in which are mingled self-confidence with the self-mastery, force of decision with grace of skill, love of existence with forgetfulness of death, active courage with patient considerateness. These people have thus come to believe in a heroism which is not in self-exaggeration but in a resigned spirit that can quality accept either action or inaction as honor or duty might dictate. Therein lies the beauty of their strength. It is in that detachment of mind which does not forget the ideal of excellence in its greed and hurry for result. When I first saw their flower decoration on my former visit to Japan, they told me how a great hero in their history had said that the contemplation of it helped him in its fighting. That is to say, perfect heroism finds its inspiration in the music of truth, which is in beauty. The convulsive and artificial cult of self-mutilation Japan has never accepted as a means of attaining virility or spiritual excellence, for she has received her lesson from nature's own teaching. She knows that in the tenderest of life's manifestations there is not only more strength but also more heroism than in the rugged asceticism of the rocks. The real strength is not in the vast desert, but it is the green grass whose triumphant life survives the trampling march of the time in an endless restoration of beauty. Our character shows its weakness when it confuses rudeness with strength, when it is self-assertive in its struck asceticism. Japan must prove to the world that the present utilization spirit may be wedded to beauty. If science and art, necessity and joy, the machine and life are once united, that will be a great day. It is a rhythm itself which is in the heart of reality. Every atom is a ring dance of lights around luminous center. Only a difference in their dance measure is responsible for the difference in the elements it is through the chain of these varied dances, which are the cadence of beauty that this universe of reality has its play in the courtyard of time and space. Great periods of history are periods of eruption, unlocked for and seemingly against the times, but they have all along been cradled in the dark chamber of the people's inner nature. The ugly spirit of the market has come from across the sea into the beautiful land of Japan, and it may for the time find its lodging in the guest house of the people, but their home will ultimately banish it, for it is a means to the genuine of her race, a sacrilege to the best that she has attained, and must keep safe, not only for her own salvation but for the glory of all humanity. সংযোজন অধ্যায়ের তৃতীয় চিঠি, The Soul of the East. My friends, it is unfortunate that the medium of language between us is a foggy medium, which makes it difficult for me to give you a clear idea of what I have in my mind about your country, which I have just visited. You must first of all consider that a man who comes to a foreign land is bound to carry with him his own traditional habits of thinking and his prejudices, of whatever kind they may be. We none of us bring a clean slate. We already have some opinions from our reading books that are far from accurate, and from our own bias and personal habits. And therefore, you cannot accept such opinions as final and have to make allowance for personal temperament. But we should not exaggerate this side of the matter overmuch, for, being human, all of us, in whatever country we may live, we can understand one another in spite of barriers, and I truly believe that I have been able to understand Japan. When I say this, I simply mean that I have been able to love your people. That proves conclusively that I have found something positive, not accidental, something universal, not merely ephemeral. Love itself is perfect understanding. I have often noticed that European visitors try to see in you something similar to themselves, and when they observe how well you have managed to handle things board from the West railways, telegraphs, post offices, and the like, they express their satisfaction. I have read a remark made by an English traveler that Japan, according to him, does not belong to the East nor China. They are almost Western. Only India, it would appear, is truly in the Orient. This traveler came with his own bias and critical intellect, and through that he saw all that he saw. Well, I must confess that I have brought with me to the Far East my Eastern mind with its own vision. It is not scientific, it is not analytical. I could not help judging you with that mind of mine, which belongs to Asia. I tried to find out what you are, and not what you have, nor what you could borrow from the West. What differences did I find between the Western point of view and that of the East? That is the question I had to put before myself, and I would like to give you the answer which I found. I think that we in the East have more faith in personality, in human relationship. All our attachments are keenly personal, human. Science deals with the impersonal, the non-human, the mechanical, the things that can be weighted and measured and tabulated. These are useful things, no doubt. Through them, we can organize our forces better in certain respects than through merely personal ways. Producing accurate, standardized articles by the million, every one of them monotonously the same. That makes you think you have got the exact thing and feel that you are not cheated. It may be that in our Eastern countries, people have not such sense of accuracy in external things, of which we therefore often make a mess and thereupon win laughter from the West, which concludes that we are not worthy of any great responsibility because we cannot master their machine. But one fact we must remember and try to find out its significances, namely that all the oldest and longest civilizations have been Eastern. Great Greece only lived a very short time. Great Rome is now nowhere. We find immense vicissitudes among modern Western nations, which even now are in such a condition that we cannot be satisfied as to their permanence. But on the other hand, look at China. It is easy to say that her central government is fearfully mismanaged. But we must acknowledge that the people are living, are civilized, are peaceful in their relations to one another, and acknowledged their obligations to their surrounding neighbors with a high code of social ethics handed down from the past. China is the oldest civilization. There must be some meaning in this. It cannot be accidental. Truth only survives. Anything that is untrue dies. When we find a people with a long and continuous history, we must know that it has found some elixir of life. Even their drawbacks prove their vitality, for they show that China was about to survive in spite of them all. Could you imagine any other nation suffering from such political mistakes, corruption, and maladministration, and not being broken into pieces? But China shows no sign of final dissolution. Deep in the heart, she has the living human personality, and to this chiefly she owes her wonderful vitality. Well, I said to myself when I saw all this, here is the secret of the East, the mystery of everlasting life. The East did solve, and here is the solution. I tried when I came to Japan to find out if you also had found this solution. It is tautology to speak of man as human, but it contains a profound truth. For it is man that is all important. It is a man who lives, not the machine. If any nation has this gift of conserving its human relation, then that is life, eternal life. For that is man's truth, man's idol, man's goal, not railways, factories, and machinery, but humanity. So, I asked myself concerning the Japanese when I came to your country, are they human or are they merely efficient? Are they merely organizers? Efficient organizers like the West? Or are there banners, all these borrowed feathers, human hearts? I found your soul, that which is external, your science, your organization, that you got from your schoolmasters, but that is not you. It is the human element that is you. It is the human touch that gives life. In China, foreigners fix their rectangles round this huge, unwieldy people. They are all ready to shark out its lifeblood. Some, on the other hand, are trying their spells, their fascination of benevolence. Poor China is in a sorry plight. But I felt that China was really living in those of her people who had never been to Harvard, had never seen skyscrapers, had never used the word democracy. How close to nature they are, and so how living. This closeness to nature is their life. It accounts for their permanence. Wonderful words I listened to in China. Wonderful words they were, which ancient China taught, and side by side with them, I listened also to those who had their Western education. I cannot describe to you my surprise at the words of one of them who wished to empty a beautiful lake in the midst of the college grounds and turn into a campus. Fancy this from a Chinese who had inherited the gift of life, not from any machine, not from the West, but from the perfect rhythm of nature which his forefathers had mastered. This speech about turning the lake into a campus coming from a Chinese was tragic. As I watched the Chinese, I found that everything they produced with their marvelous fingers was a marvel of beauty. I said, "Oh, what a great civilization this must be! Not what the West has called progress, but the true civilization." I had the same feeling about Japan. I saw the shadow of the West leathering. I saw beauty being swallowed up by Western ideas. You are also using these words about progress, which the West has taught you. But when I came closer, I found the same deeply human touch. It is a creative spirit that you have, for it is in this human element that creation lies. The machine is not creative. Japan can never forget her creative gift which she has received from of old. I do not mean merely your artistic gift. Most certainly, I do not mean at all those things you borrow and imitate. There you make awful blunders. Whenever I have seen those imitations, I have wondered how your feeling of beauty could so desert you that your choice in such things should always go astray and the result be so often ludicrous, third rate, wrong in every way. But when you handle your own things, there is ever that efficiency which is graceful, which is living, for you have the peculiar proficiency which has grace in it as well as utility. To take one example, only when you offer a gift to anyone, the care you take about it, and the way you offer it. Make it beautiful. This shows that you are not in haste. You have leisure for the little gracious acts that you are human. Man in haste want to multiply profit. Profit is good in its place, but man is a man and not merely profit making automation. The man who goes on making profits until he drops down dead in the counting house, what beauty, what humanity is there in his life? Such persons are more like dolls, having one movement only which they repeat, never coming to any final meaning at all. This ludicrous efficiency which the West has cultivated to the utmost pitch is doing such enormous mischief that it is going to be the death of man someday. If the machine is at last triumphant, man will be crushed. But I have felt in Japan, in spite of this superficial aspect, a deep human touch in your relationship. You acknowledged personal relationships everywhere. Your government is not a merry government, but a person, because your whole civilization is personal. It is the wonderfully complicated and delicate nervous system which makes the human body one. So with the Eastern civilization, it is this nervous system of the body politic based on mutual obligation which makes for its unity. All classes are bound in the East not by contract but by this inner living bond of unity. This has given the Eastern civilization its humanity, and because of this, it has produced great ideals. We are grateful to the West for its science, but all the great religious ideals which save our human nature from wreckage have sprung from the East, because in the East we believe in the person, not in the machine. We therefore only make ourselves a laughing stock when we copy the West. But our Eastern hearts are touched at once when we meet with human kindness. Be gentle, be patient, for that will save you, that will make you live, that will give you life everlasting. Not machine guns, not poison gas, not bomb throwing aeroplanes. In the end, man will only survive where he is human and not where he is demonically making profits. No, let us at least have respect for humanity, and let us not follow in the wake of those who are not so much concerned in nourishing and protecting the truth of man as in the so-called interests of what they call their Nordic race. Let them rule, but we shall gain our rights of sovereignty in a higher world than theirs in the spiritual world. There the East has ruled the West in the past through its great spiritual leaders. Now even in that there is a downfall in the West, and spiritual leadership of the East is acknowledged no longer. But let us accept our moral responsibility as a society, say with pride that you are not of the West, that you believe in dharma more than in profit making. I have seen that you in Japan have this greatness. If I did not see it, I should hold my head down. You have your loyalty to man, your love for man. You have infinite patience in little things. All these and many others are human traits. They will make you great, not scientific toys and dressed up dolls from the West. I do not belittle the West. Truth is very valuable, and the West has given to us new intellectual truth. But a devil may make use of it, and science has lost its divinity through the handling that the West has given it. Therefore, the East must stand firm. The East must exercise her own judgment and reject the encroachment of the inhuman, keeping firm her faith and waiting patiently for a great future. Let again, once more, the sun arise on the eastern horizon, and when the morning does come, it will not be ushered in by the rumbling of market carts and the clatter of commodities, but by the music of faith.